Picture this. A nation sends its soldiers into war by the hundreds of thousands. Year after year, they pour into the meat grinder. The promises of a quick victory faded long ago. The promises of territorial conquest almost laughable at this point. And now, for the first time since the invasion began, that nation can no longer replace the soldiers it is losing fast enough to keep the war going at the pace it demands. The machine is starting to break, and the man running it knows it. We cover the numbers, the intelligence, and the hard reality behind the world's most consequential conflicts. And right now, there is no story more consequential, more staggering, and more revealing of a military on the brink of structural collapse than what has happened to this particular army in the first 3 months of the year. We are going to lay it all out for you today. The losses, the math, the desperation, and the dangerous moves now being made inside the country's own borders to keep the war machine fed. This is a big one. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss an update like this. Let's start with the headline number, 89,000. That is the confirmed number of casualties, killed and seriously wounded, in just the first 3 months of the year. January, February, March, 90 days gone. This figure was announced by the defending nation's leadership at a press conference at the end of March, and it lands like a hammer. At that rate, the invading force is sacrificing nearly 30,000 of its own people every single month. And here is the thing. January and February were still cold. The offensive tempo slows in winter as frozen ground and brutal conditions make large-scale armored operations more difficult to sustain. The spring offensive, the major push that commanders had been planning and building toward, did not fully ramp up until March. That means the worst month of those 3 is almost certainly the last one. March. The month when the army started bleeding at the highest rate of the year so far. The month when, according to battlefield media monitoring, forces recorded a single-day casualty count of 1,620 troops on March 18th, a record for the year and the highest figure in the preceding 12 months. So, what does that tell us about the trajectory going forward? It tells us that 89,000 for the first quarter is not the ceiling. It is the floor. Now, before we go any further into what this means, it is worth pausing on a word we have been using carefully. Confirmed. When leadership says 89,000, they mean confirmed casualties. Casualties that can be verified through direct drone footage, intelligence intercepts, battlefield recovery operations, and cross-referenced reporting. The head of the defending nation's unmanned systems forces has made clear that up to 20% of strikes on troop concentrations cannot be fully verified in terms of exact casualty counts. These include deep strikes, long-range artillery attacks, and situations where soldiers are killed under rubble or far from direct camera coverage. In other words, the actual number of casualties in the first quarter is almost certainly higher than 89,000. The confirmed figure is, by definition, conservative. Let us put 89,000 in perspective, because the raw number alone does not fully communicate the scale of what we are talking about. The United States lost approximately 2,400 soldiers over 20 years of war in Afghanistan. This army is now losing a comparable number every 2 days. This same nation fought its own war in Afghanistan between 1979 and 1989, during which it lost around 15,000 soldiers over the course of a decade. In this current year, it is burning through that many soldiers roughly every 2 weeks. As the Center for Strategic and International Studies documented in a January report, the first year of this invasion alone was approximately 25 times deadlier for these forces than the entire Chechen conflict and 35 times more lethal than the Soviet-Afghan War. This is a conflict of a scale and a bloodiness that this nation has not experienced since the Second World War. Now, here is where the numbers get truly devastating because 89,000 casualties in 1 quarter would be catastrophic on its own. But what makes it war-defining is the context around it. The most insane thing about this figure is that it is actually an improvement. Between November of last year and January of this year, the invading forces suffered close to 100,000 casualties over a 3-month period as they pushed desperately against a key defensive city through a freezing winter, getting torn apart by drone kill zones and highly mobile search and destroy units targeting isolated infantry. A 90-day period, nearly 100,000 gone, and 89,000 in the first quarter is somehow the better number. Let that sink in for a moment. Here is where it becomes truly remarkable, though, because the casualty rate is only one side of the equation. The other side is what those casualties are actually buying. What territory, what strategic gains, what military objectives are being achieved in exchange for this generational sacrifice? According to the Institute for the Study of War, between October of last year and March of this year, a 6-month window, forces seized approximately 1,230 square kilometers of territory. That is roughly 745 square miles. To put that into perspective, the defending nation covers about 233,000 square miles of territory. The invader currently controls around 20% of it. The remaining 80%, it still needs to conquer. It just spent 6 months and somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, to take 0.32% of what remains. At this rate, the math is not just bad, it is existential, and the rate of advance is slowing. According to the data, territorial gains over the same October to March period were dramatically lower than the previous year. In the same 6-month window of the previous cycle, forces captured approximately 2,716 square kilometers. This year, that number fell to 1,230 kilometers, a 30% decline in territorial acquisition. Even as the casualty rate has been climbing higher, the invader is paying more and getting less. Let us do the math on the blood cost per mile because the numbers are almost incomprehensible. We take the combined casualty estimates for the 6 months covered by the data, roughly 184,000 when we account for confirmed losses and adjust for overlap. We divide that by the 745 square miles gained. The result? The invading force is losing approximately 247 soldiers for every single square mile of territory it captures. 247 lives per square mile. That is not a war being won. That is a civilization slowly consuming itself. Now, every war analyst, every military planner, every armchair strategist who has followed this conflict knows that this invading nation has always operated on the premise that it has more men than the defender. More cannon fodder, more capacity to absorb losses. That has been the strategic bet since day one. Outlast, outbleed, overwhelm. And for a long time, ugly as it was, that logic had a kind of brutal arithmetic behind it. But something has fundamentally changed this year. And this is the part of the story that goes from catastrophic to potentially war-ending for the leadership. The nation is no longer replacing the soldiers it is losing. According to intelligence reporting, for 4 consecutive months, from December through March, the so-called arrivals to departures balance has been firmly in the negative. More soldiers are being removed from the battlefield than are being added. That has not happened before on a sustained basis. And it is happening now precisely when the spring offensive is escalating, which means the losses are going up, not down, while the recruitment pipeline is already failing to keep pace. Here is the math that is grinding military planners into the ground. The recruitment target for this year is 409,000 new soldiers. In the first quarter alone, intelligence estimates that the country managed to recruit up to 22% of that annual target, approximately 80,000 people. That sounds acceptable until you realize that the army is losing close to 90,000 confirmed casualties in that same quarter. It is recruiting less than it is losing, and that gap is only widening. To reach the annual target of 409,000, the nation would need to hit approximately 25% of its target each quarter. It is hitting 22%. And that is before accounting for the reality that 89,000 is the confirmed figure, not the actual total. If real casualties are even 15% higher than confirmed, that quarterly recruitment deficit blows open even further. And here is where desperation begins to show in ways that are genuinely extraordinary and tell you everything you need to know about the state of the war. Money has been the engine of the volunteer recruitment model since the full-scale invasion began. The leader has kept away from the political minefield of mass mobilization by simply paying people to go to war. Sign-up bonuses in some regions reached as high as $40,000. That is a staggering sum in a country where median incomes remain low, especially in the remote regions that have been disproportionately targeted for recruitment: the Far East, Siberia, and the ethnic republics. As one analysis noted, these regions have functioned as the primary manpower pool precisely because they have nothing else to offer the central government. In the words of one researcher, supplying soldiers for the war has become the main indicator of political effectiveness for regional governors. But as reports indicate, something is starting to crack inside that system. One regional governor has begun mandating that businesses directly participate in military recruitment. Companies with between 150 and 300 employees must now submit 2 names of workers they consider suitable for frontline service. Companies with between 300 and 500 workers must submit 5 names. Any business that refuses to comply faces a fine of 1 million rubles, approximately $12,000. This is not voluntary. This is not economic incentive. This is compulsion. This is the state reaching directly into the workforce and selecting people for war. And the sign-up bonuses that built the voluntary recruitment system are disappearing. Bonus payments are being reduced across multiple regions because the regional governments that were bankrolling those payments are simply running out of money. The regions are stretched. The war has consumed budgets, labor markets, and economic capacity. And now the central government is asking those same regions to keep squeezing when the juice is already gone. So if workers will not volunteer and bonuses are drying up, where does the state look next? The classrooms. According to multiple independent media outlets, the nation's education minister has directed university rectors to ensure that 2% of their student bodies sign military contracts. As of last year, there were approximately 2.2 million male students enrolled in universities. A 2% conversion rate would produce roughly 44,000 new soldiers. Add vocational colleges to the count, and the number climbs to approximately 76,000. According to documents obtained by investigative journalists, the Defense Ministry's broader goal is to recruit nearly 79,000 people into drone units alone by the end of the year, with the majority coming from the student pipeline. The pitch to students is carefully constructed. Recruiters tell them they are signing 1-year contracts. They tell them they will be operating drones from behind the front lines, gaining high-tech skills applicable to the civilian economy. They tell them the service will be conducted essentially as academic leave, that they can continue their studies when they return. Recruitment advertising has appeared at prestigious journalism and law faculties in the capital. Testimonials from enlisted students were published celebrating what was described as the honor of military service. At one vocational college, the president shamed students who refused to sign contracts, asking them in a recorded meeting, "Are you all cowards sitting here scared for your lives?" But here is the brutal reality behind those promises. According to lawyers for the conscientious objectors movement who reviewed student contracts, those 1-year contracts cannot actually be terminated. The mobilization decree signed nearly 4 years ago is still legally in effect. Under that decree, all military contracts remain valid until the end of the mobilization period, which has never been formally declared over. In other words, students signing what they are told is a 1-year contract are, in legal terms, signing an open-ended commitment to serve until the war is declared done by the leadership. And even the promise of drone operator roles is hollow. Multiple reports have confirmed that students who sign contracts explicitly for the unmanned systems forces are being redirected, assigned instead to regular infantry units on the grounds that they did not fulfill acceptance criteria. They are being sent to the front lines they were told they would never see. Even more disturbing, as reported just days ago in one southern region, Military recruiters are now approaching underage students, those under 18, asking them to sign letters pledging to enlist once they come of age. The document, a photo of which was published by a student rights project, requests formal enlistment paperwork and includes a pledge to sign a future contract. The state is reaching into its schools. It is recruiting the futures of children who cannot yet legally serve. According to student media, recruitment campaigns have now taken place at more than 200 universities and colleges across the country. This is not a targeted program. This is a nationwide sweep. Let us pull back and look at the larger picture, because what we are seeing is not just a manpower crisis. It is the convergence of multiple interlocking catastrophes that are feeding on each other in ways that no amount of short-term recruitment can fix. The defending nation has become a more effective military destruction machine than at any previous point in this war. The drone kill zones that first defined the character of this conflict have been expanding dramatically as they have developed and deployed what are known as middle-range strike drones, systems capable of hitting targets up to 200 kilometers from the front line. They hit logistics routes, they hit ammunition depots, they hit areas where troops are massing before assaults, they hit fuel infrastructure, and they hit air defense systems, meaning that the shield-protecting assets deep inside occupied territory and inside the invader's own borders is weakening with each passing month. By the end of last year, the defending nation was producing approximately 4 million drones per year, and officials have signaled clearly that production is not slowing down. It is accelerating. This is why the spring offensive, which began in mid-March, has already produced catastrophic results at an early stage. According to Western estimates, casualties in just the opening days of the spring offensive were nearing 10,000 troops. In the 4 days leading up to March 23rd, the invader attempted over 600 separate assaults against defensive positions. The cost: 6,090 soldiers killed or wounded. That is approximately 1,220 casualties every 24 hours. Over the same period in late March, one single assault on a key axis, as confirmed by defending Army Corps, involved more than 500 infantrymen, 28 armored vehicles, over 100 motorcycles and light vehicles, and achieved nothing. No breakthrough, no territory. Just another entry in a casualty ledger that has grown beyond all comprehension. The Institute for the Study of War assessed in late March that forces were unlikely to seize the defenders' fortress belt, the chain of fortified urban centers along the main front, this year. Limited tactical gains were possible, analysts said, but at significant cost. And the numbers are already confirming that assessment. Behind the front lines, the long-range drone and missile campaign is also running into new problems. The defenders' drone production expansion is enabling it to systematically knock out air defense systems in occupied territories. More air defenses eliminated means more deep strikes can penetrate further into held territory, which means more pressure on logistics, which means more difficulty supplying the front. The degradation is happening on both ends, at the sharp tip of the spear and deep in the rear. Now, here is where it becomes truly explosive politically, because this is not just a military problem anymore, this is a social contract problem. This is a governance crisis. The nation was already struggling with a crippling labor shortage before any of this year's developments. The war machine had consumed enormous numbers of working-age men. The sanctions regime had hollowed out key industries. And now, as reported on March 30th, over 20 factories in just one industrial region alone have shifted to 3-day work weeks. Not because of some enlightened work-life balance policy, but because demand is collapsing. Labor has been redirected to the war, and these firms can no longer sustain their pre-war workforce levels. A vicious cycle has been built where the war consumes the labor force, which undermines the economic base, which depletes the revenue that funds the war, which requires more coercive recruitment to sustain, which pulls more labor from the economy, round and round and round. And now the leadership wants to draft the students who should be building the post-war economy. They want to mandate that businesses send their employees to the front, removing productive workers at a moment when the country can least afford to lose them. The former CIA director, in a January interview with the Financial Times, assessed military casualties at approximately 1.1 million since the start of the invasion. A foreign intelligence service put the same figure at roughly 1 million. A January report from a major think tank placed the total at 1.2 million casualties, killed, wounded, and missing, including as many as 325,000 killed. By late February, a highly informed former senior Western official estimated the toll at 1 million military casualties. Independent media, drawing on multiple tracking methodologies, estimated actual death tolls between 319,000 and 461,000 as of April this year. These are not propaganda figures. These are the assessments of Western intelligence agencies, independent research institutions, and investigative media outlets that have spent years cross-referencing battlefield data. And they all point to the same conclusion. An almost incomprehensible price has already been paid in blood, and the billing is accelerating. Yet the leader cannot stop. He cannot end the war without losing politically. He cannot declare victory because victory is nowhere close to being achieved. He controls roughly the same 20% of territory that he has held for months while the casualty rate soars. He cannot retreat because that would shatter the narrative of inevitability that has sustained his internal political position for 4 years. So he is going to push, he is going to escalate, and he is going to try to solve a structural manpower crisis with tactics that will deepen long-term problems, even as they temporarily patch the short-term ones. The direction is becoming clear. A new year-round conscription system signed into law came into effect on January 1st of this year. As reported in a comprehensive investigation, young men between 18 and 30 can now be called up at any point in the year rather than only during the traditional spring and autumn draft windows. Draft decisions now remain valid for a full year rather than just one 3-month cycle, closing the legal loopholes that conscripts previously used to delay their service by running out the clock. A travel ban is now triggered automatically the moment a draft notice appears in the electronic registry. The net is tightening, and the people trapped in it are running out of legal escape routes. And beyond conscription, reports indicate that the poor results of the latest recruitment campaigns are driving the leadership toward converting voluntary recruitment into involuntary mobilization. A limited and rolling reserve call-up scheme is reportedly being prepared. This would represent the first major mobilization step since the deeply unpopular partial mobilization of September 2022, which triggered a mass exodus of military-aged men and generated enormous domestic political pressure. The leadership knows this. The better part of 2 years has been spent trying to avoid this moment, but the math is forcing the hand. The defending nation, for its part, is not standing still. The target has been set at 50,000 confirmed casualties per month by the end of the year. That is the rate of attrition sufficient to force genuine negotiations and potentially end the war. Based on the trajectory of March, where daily losses were touching 1,500 to 1,700 during peak offensive activity, that threshold is already being approached in the most intense periods. Multiply the March peak rate across 30 days, and you arrive somewhere close to 46,000 monthly losses. The defender is roughly 4,000 away from the target it believes can end this war, and the defender is building the tools to close that gap. Middle-range strike drones are in mass production. Anti-drone defense systems are being expanded. Air defense capabilities are evolving continuously. Western military and financial support continues to flow. Loan mechanisms from international partners have ensured that the defense is not running dry, even when political headwinds get complicated. The defender is in this for the long haul, and it is getting better at fighting it. Meanwhile, the invader is getting worse. The 89,000 confirmed casualties of the first quarter. The negative arrivals to departures balance for 4 straight months. The 22% recruitment quota hit when 25% is needed just to tread water. The university sweeps, the business mandates, the underage pledge campaigns, the year-round conscription system, the approaching mobilization. These are not the indicators of a military on the verge of a decisive breakthrough. These are the indicators of a military grinding towards structural failure. Every square mile taken costs approximately 247 soldiers by current math. Control sits at roughly 20% of the target nation. The remaining 80% it aspires to conquer would cost casualties on a scale that goes beyond the capacity of any modern nation to sustain. The invasion was launched with the stated aim of eliminating sovereignty and absorbing territory. 4 years later, the opposite has been achieved on every front. Sovereignty has never been more fiercely defended. National identity has been galvanized into something that will outlast the current leadership by generations. The military has been exposed as structurally inferior to what its pre-war reputation suggested. And the economy, the demographics, the labor force, and international standing have all been badly damaged by a campaign that continues to demand more than can be sustainably given. The trajectory of the first quarter is not an anomaly. It is an acceleration of trends that have been building for years. The invader is losing the war of attrition it chose to fight. And as it sinks deeper into that losing battle, its responses, drafting students, pressing businesses, expanding conscription, are making the underlying problems worse, not better. The defending nation has faced 4 years of punishment, bombardment, occupation, and civilian suffering on a scale that defies easy description. And it is still standing, still fighting, still innovating. Middle-range strike drones expanding kill zones. 4 million drones a year coming off production lines. Air defenses being pushed deeper into occupied territory. The capital is not waiting for a collapse. It is building the tools to make it collapse faster. What comes next is not certain. War rarely is. But the mathematics of this year are pointing in one direction. And for all the tactical cunning and political survival instincts in the world, mathematics cannot be rewritten. The invader is spending more than it is earning on every front, in blood, in money, in manpower, in future potential. And those deficits are compounding. We will continue to track every development on this story. The spring offensive is underway. The recruitment crisis is unfolding in real time. The mobilization debate inside the halls of power is intensifying, and the drone campaign is entering a new phase. If you want to understand not just what is happening, but why it matters and where it leads, this is where you need to be. Make sure you are subscribed and share this report with anyone who wants the real numbers behind the most consequential conflict of our time.